Dude, it's like fighting a raid boss. Hello and welcome. Today we will be revisiting Mirage as a lot has changed with the game since I originally made the Mirage video. This video will be formatted slightly differently as I will be allowing the use of archon shards as Mirage scales exceptionally well with the shards, in particular the casting speed yellow shard, as the star of today is her fourth ability Prism. Prism has a very lengthy casting time, and the shards not only greatly increase your survivability, but they also greatly increase your DPS. Another thing I will be doing slightly different is I will be going over the weapon loadout first, as it is a bit complicated, so let's jump right in. The primary on Mirage, you should almost always just be using a Cedo. The reason you want to use a Cedo is because the alt fire shoots out a glaive which primes enemies. Normally it primes enemies just like, well, but on Mirage, through the use of her first ability, Hall of Mirrors, instead of just shooting out one glaive, you instead shoot out 5. This means that you instantly prime enemies with every single status effect instantaneously. It is very, very, very strong. Now as for the other two weapons, this is where it starts to get complicated. So in a loadout like this, with Cedo, Compressa, Praetos, I wouldn't really have a way to kill the Acolytes. While solo, you could probably kill the Acolytes comfortably with the Praetos, but in a group, they would have too much health, armor, or attenuation, and you wouldn't really be able to kill them with a Praetos in a timely manner. So I was opting to use a Spore Lacer or a Latum, while in a survival setting to kill the Acolytes. However, there is an alternative that does allow you to scale significantly longer. So instead, you can run the Compressa, which works similarly to the Cedo with the use of Secondary Encumber and Hall of Mirrors, making it so you just instantly prime the enemies with like every single status effect in the game instantaneously. This allows you to scale very, very, very long, up to level cap even, but now you're back to square one of not having a way to kill Acolytes. Well, it's a good thing you're playing Mirage and you have Eclipse. This means that the glaive in itself just outright scales the level cap, but there's also an alternative, more fun way, which is the Zaw method. So Zaws double dip on Eclipse with the projectile, meaning that they can do insane damage. This is the build I was using as a Corrosive build, as I am not armor stripping the enemies, I'm just 90% stripping through Corrosive and Heat. If you are armor stripping, either through abilities or Unaro, you can instead opt for a Viral Crunch. With Eclipse and certain setups, your Zaw can easily hit damage cap, as long as you have a decent build and a decent Riven. Now, onto the builds. This is the standard Silence build. Oh, I actually did forget one thing. Those of you with a keen eye may have noticed I am playing base Mirage. This is because all of these builds are shield gate builds due to Mirage lacking the ability to really survive as a health tank. Mirage Prime has increased shields, effectively making her worse than base Mirage. That being said, every build I am showing does work on Mirage Prime, you just have to run one more Augur mod on your secondary weapon. Now, moving on to the builds, the first build is the old Silence build that is now outdated. Even though this is now suboptimal, this is still better than the original Silence build, thanks to DE doubling the health that you get from health orbs, effectively doubling the effectiveness of Equilibrium. The extra sustain that you now have allows you to drop efficiency from this build by running Blind Rage to get insanely high strength. You can then convert that strength into duration. The reason duration is so important on Prism is because it scales off of two things. Firstly, it scales off of the brightness of the map, just like Eclipse, where if you're in the darkness, you don't deal as much damage. Instead, you get DR, and when you're in the brightness, when you're in the light, you get a damage buff. Prism works the same way. The brighter the area, the more damage you deal. Not only that, but the more times you hit an enemy with Prism, the more damage that Prism will do, scaling infinitely until the ability runs out. This means that Prism effectively scales with duration, making duration double or triple dip as duration, efficiency, and strength, as Duration also lowers the drain cost of Prism itself. I will pop up on screen the differences between the old builds. Remember though, I do have Archon shards equipped, and I have 3 strength shards, meaning that my strength in this build would otherwise be 149%. Now moving on to the new standard build, and now you want to opt for Nourish instead of Silence. Nourish allows you to run even more strength, and on top of that, it allows you to drop Arcane Energize, which you otherwise need for any Arcane you want. I prefer Multificiency for even more duration, for even more damage. Another thing to notice is I am using Narrow-Minded on these builds, and you can change the rank of Narrow-Minded to change your range values to get your range to where you want it. In the footage you'll be seeing of Survival, I was running a rank 7 Narrow-Minded with this stat spread. Later on though, I found that I did prefer just running a max rank Narrow-Minded. Another thing that Nourish does, on top of just allowing you to run higher strength and more duration, is it also gives you viral on your weapons without needing to mod for it. This means that you can change your Cedo from a viral Cedo to a corrosive Cedo, and now you have a corrosive viral Cedo, meaning that your Cedo AoE spreads viral and corrosive up to 10 stacks pretty much instantly. One thing to note with Nourish on Mirage is you do actually give your clones the Nourish buff. You just have to make sure you cast Nourish after pressing Hall of Mirrors. Now moving on to the other builds, there's Terrify and Therastrike. Both of these are armor strip builds which allow you to scale to level cap with Prism, whereas otherwise Prism stops killing around level 3 to 4000. Armor strips allow this ability to scale to level cap. The problem with the armor strip builds is before they didn't work at all as Equilibrium wasn't buffed, but now that Equilibrium's buffed, they work in quotation marks. So with just Equilibrium, they don't really function. To make these builds properly function, you need to take off ability strength shards and put on anywhere between 1 to 2 yellow energy orb efficiency shards. Without them, you cannot sustain, and they just don't function properly, unfortunately. The Therastrike build kind of works, just due to the nature of Therastrike costing less energy than Terrify, but the Terrify build just outright does not work at all unless you have energy orb efficiency shards. And then of course there's the Disruption build, tailored specifically towards Disruption. I took off Prime Sure-Footed for Cunning Drift to give myself some extra range, as I also took off Augur Reach for Vigorous Swap. Vigorous Swap, Arcane Fury, Eclipse, Nourish basically allows you to scale to level cap, even like without armor stripping the demos. All you have to do is make sure with your Zaws that you prime the enemies properly, and then you just headshot them with your Contagion. Unfortunately, they died before I actually got to kill them. But I will show footage of the Zaws doing absurd damage. There is one downside, and that is you want to headshot with the Zaws projectile. And when you're walking up, doing something like this to the enemies, it's kind of hard to see where their head is. So I would suggest, if you're running a Zaws, turning off damage numbers. That way you can more accurately see where you're actually aiming. Even with that, it is still kind of hard to see, but it's probably just due to my colors actually. But yeah, I would highly suggest turning damage numbers off so you can guarantee get headshots with your Zaws. Now that is it for the builds. And the last but not least, there is the Panzer, which is just a standard Panzer build with synth bonds equipped. And again, I did forget something one last time. So in Disruption, you can drop Moderai, which is the focus school of choice for the 40% ability strength and casting speed. But in Disruption, the 50% casting speed isn't as important, and instead you can switch to Unaro. Unaro gives you your Prime Sure-Footed back, and it also gives you access to an armor strip so you can scale to level cap even easier. Now moving on to the rankings, we're discussing Mirage in relation to 4 separate topics. Firstly, her KPM, secondly her survivability, thirdly her viability, and finally how fun she is to play. All of this data is sampled from hundreds and hundreds of missions as Mirage, solo, and in a group. Now let's begin with the first topic, Mirage's KPM. Now, Mirage has arguably the absolute highest KPM in the game, only rivaled by Saren. The problem is, Mirage's KPM is very inconsistent as it depends on the tile set that you're in, more so than most other Warframes, due to the nature of her fourth ability doing different levels of damage depending on the levels of brightness. This means in a place like Mott, where pretty much every single room is max brightness, you do insane KPM and you scale for a very, very long time. In fact, in some place like Mott, you can easily scale to level 3 to 4000 as long as you're just consistently priming all of the ads with your Cedo, Epitaph, or Compressa. However, on the flip side, if you're in a bad tile set with bad lighting, such as the Grineer ship tile set on Sedna, you suddenly start falling off around level 800 even when you're priming. Yes, you can still kill them even up to like level 2 to 3000 with your abilities while only priming on a bad tile set, but it does take a bit of time. That being said, once you throw in an armor strip, you now do scale all the way to level cap. This is mostly irrelevant as most people will just go to level 200 and even that is a stretch. And in those lower levels, it really doesn't matter the tile set that you're in as long as it's like an open tile set, so then like you actually have line of sight to kill the enemies. If you have line of sight to kill the enemies at level like 150, you will kill them regardless of the tile set. Because of these reasons, I will give her an S plus rank for her KPM, though you could be petty and only rank it an S due to the inconsistencies, and I honestly wouldn't blame you, but I am giving it an S plus. Now, moving on to the second topic, her survivability. And Mirage's survivability is kind of hit or miss, and this is the first topic where archon shards actually affect the ranking. Now, just outright, Mirage's survivability, if you look at it at a base level, is pretty poor. However, there's one thing that Mirage has going for her that greatly increases her survivability, and it is the fact that her KPM is an S plus rank. Mirage just instantly deletes the entire room, making it so you're pretty much trolling if you die as Mirage under like level 150, because her 4 literally, I'm trying not to exaggerate here, but her 4 just one-shots all of the enemies. Like, the only way that you can really die as Mirage in low-level missions, as long as, like, you can sustain, like, you have the proper build to sustain and everything, is if you don't have Prime Sure-Footed, and you get knocked down, and then you just die before you can actually cast your abilities. Outside of that, it is actually really difficult to die on her, just due to the sheer amount of enemies that you're killing per second. Like, there's just nothing ever on screen. Like, if you pay attention to the Mott footage, you'll see that like I hardly ever have to shield gate, and I pretty much consistently have the full 36% duration buff from Molt efficiency. Now obviously in the disruption footage that isn't the case, but that's due to the fact that the disruption footage is level cap content. So obviously I'm not one-shotting them, especially since I'm using Unera to armor strip and not something like Terrify, Pillage, or Therastrike. Now, without Archon shards, however, her survivability does falter slightly due to the nature of her 4 having such a long cast time. You can die in between casting her 4th ability and you being able to do anything just because you're locked in an animation. With Archon shards, this doesn't happen, as now the cast time is short enough to where even if the enemies instantly break your shield and then instantly try to shoot you right as your shield gate invincibility runs up, you will have time to react. With Archon shards, I would give her an A rank for survivability, and without Archon shards, I would give her a B+, so I will give her an A- in between. Now moving on to the third topic, her viability. And her viability kind of has the same problem as her KPM, where it's kind of hard to gauge it because there are inconsistencies in the tile sets. Regardless, because most viability comes from just like, even though there's inconsistencies in her damage, you can take her to pretty much any exterminate in the game. Not every, like the one on Sedna is kind of rough. It's kind of slow to do on her, but almost every other like exterminate or just fast capture, rescue, etc. you can do extremely fast as Mirage, even on Steel Path. In fact, there are some tile sets, like the Corpus like ice tile set. You can do that mission on Steel Path as Mirage as quickly as you can on the base star chart, because you just run through the mission and you instantly one-shot everything. You literally just equip your Praetos and just, you're not even worrying about killing ads. You just shoot the Ceto, pressure 4, run to extraction. Everything's dead. Like, you don't have to try. Obviously, in survival, she is insanely good. In disruption, she's not insanely good, but she's good, just due to her 1 buff and running Nourish, and obviously Eclipse is very strong whenever it works. And even though the Prism build isn't the best for disruption, it still makes gathering keys for like the first 30 rounds insanely quick. Like, I did a duo level cap on the Sedna disruption with a friend who was also playing Mirage. He was running the Therastrike build, I was running Nourish, as we just wanted to test them out. And we did a duo level cap, spur of the moment, like not even like super sweating. We did it in an hour and 50 minutes. So even though the Prism build isn't the best in disruption, it still definitely works there. And as for other mission types, like excavations, it goes back to her KPM. She isn't the best at excavations, but again, her KPM is just so high, she's still far from the worst at excavation. Same thing with defense. Like, you defend it by killing. Like, a good defense is a good offense. Like, on Warframe, not really, but it definitely applies in this case, just because her offense is so insanely high. Because of these reasons, I will also give her viability an A rank. Again, it's only held back due to the inconsistencies, but it really isn't that big of a deal for base Steel Path, and it's not a big deal at all for like non-Steel Path. Now, moving on to the final topic, is she fun? And in short, yes. Mirage, I think, is my favorite Warframe in the entire game. You're playing a super aggro Warframe, just sprinting everywhere. You have a disco ball of death flying around you, instantly killing enemies in base Steel Path, instantly killing enemies up to an hour in Steel Path, having scaling potential. Even if you don't want to run a Prism Guard build, you can still just run around as a gun frame. Like, the reason I like the Prism Guard build so much, I said this in my original Mirage video, is because you're a perfect mix of being a caster frame and a gun frame. Like, you obviously have buffs, buffing your weapons, but then you also have an ability that just follows you around nuking the map. It's like old school, I can't remember what the old Ember ability was called, but it's like the old Ember ability, but like 20 times better. It just doesn't hit through walls. It's like, I don't know, it's incredibly fun. And then on top of that, you have 4 clones that shoot your guns, making the Ceto, which is already insane, like even more potent. It's just fun. I think she's arguably one of the most fun Warframes in the game, and I think she is my personal favorite Warframe in the game. Easy S+ rank for fun. In conclusion, Mirage is an S- tier Warframe whose only problem is being inconsistent. It speaks volumes of how strong she truly is, that even in her worst case scenarios, she is still a well above average Warframe, and in her best case scenarios, she is a contender for being the strongest Warframe in the entirety of the game. He juked me.